I'm Alberto Lammers, Director of Communications at the UCLA Latino Policy and Politics Institute, and the moderator for the program. The first part of our webinar will focus on findings from our report on automation and its impact on Latino workers in California. The second part will be a panel discussion exploring workforce development strategies and policy solutions. UCLA LPPI Policy Fellow Citlali Tejeda, a fourth-year public affairs major at UCLA and co-author of the report, will start by providing an overview of the issue. She will be followed by Misael Galdames and Ji Zong, Senior Policy Analyst at LPPI and fellow co-authors, who will present their findings. Then we'll move into our panel discussion. Today's panelists include Amanda Berson-Shilcock, Senior Fellow at the National Skills Coalition, Anthony Cordova, Vice Chancellor of Workforce and Economic Development at the California Community College, and Kimberly Rosenberger, Senior Government Relations Advocate at the ACIU. We'll take your questions during the panel. Please use the Q&A function to send them, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can during this hour. All right, let's get started. Citlali, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Alberto. Hi, everyone. My name is Citlali, and I'm a fourth-year undergraduate student at UCLA, and I'm a policy fellow with LPPI. I was one of the co-authors of this report, and I'm really excited for us to share our findings with you all today. So I'm going to start off by setting the scene. Over the past few years, routine automation technology has become more prevalent in our daily lives. I've seen cashiers replaced by self-checkout machines, which have become an option in almost every grocery store. I've seen self-driving cars, for example, throughout the streets of LA become more and more common. I've even seen routine automation on my own campus here at UCLA. There's the Starship robots that transport food from one side of the campus to the other. And we used to have a Jamba Juice store that was replaced by a fully automated Jamba Juice machine instead. We're witnessing major shifts, not just in how work gets done, but in who gets to do it. And for many of us, these changes are deeply personal. We've witnessed how automation has impacted older generations, specifically our parents and our grandparents, who once held jobs that were stable and long-lasting. Now, many of these roles are disappearing or evolving faster than ever. For someone who worked in the same job for 30 years, being told that they need to reskill or adapt to new systems can feel daunting and disorienting. At the same time, we're watching our own future careers shift. As students and individuals at the beginning of our careers, we're stepping into a job market that is more uncertain than ever before. It's no longer about what degree you hold, but whether your skills align with a workforce transformed by automation and artificial intelligence. These impacts are not felt equally. Latino workers who are overrepresented in many of the industries most vulnerable to automation, like manufacturing, food service, and agriculture, face unique challenges in navigating this situation. The risks are real, and so is the need for targeted support and inclusive policy solutions. Today's conversation isn't just about technological innovation. Today's conversation is about people. It's about how we respond to change, support one another through disruption, and make sure that no one is left behind. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Misael and Jeet for the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Citlali. And good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Misael Galdames, and I'm a senior research analyst at the UCLA Latino Policy and Politics Institute and a co-author of our recent automation report. Before we begin, I would like to thank and acknowledge our fourth co-author, former LPPI fellow Gloria Magallanes, and LPPI policy fellows Alondra Cervantes and Isabel Ortega Hernandez, who played critical roles in the development of this report and this presentation. We would also like to express our sincere gratitude to our partners from various nonprofits, research centers, and government agencies for the time and care they took to meet with us and to support us in this work, as well as our funders, especially the California Latino Caucus, the JP Morgan Chase Global Philanthropy, and the James Irvine Foundation. Today, my co-author Ji Zong and I will be sharing high-level findings and policy recommendations from our recent report, On the Front Lines, Automation Risk for Latino Workers in California. This report is the beginning of our research agenda on the impact of technology on workers and economic mobility. Over the last two decades, our economy has become increasingly digitalized and automated. Many jobs, as Citlali mentioned, that were once done by humans alone are now done by a mix of people and machines. Today, for example, you might find aerospace workers using augmented reality to improve efficiency on their assembly lines. And this technological shift was especially apparent during the pandemic, when reducing human contact was crucial for health and safety reasons. In airports, cleaning robots replaced janitorial staff to ensure their safety. Many restaurants, grocery stores, and hospitals switched to contactless services to minimize the risk of COVID-19 transmission. However, since the pandemic's end, the pace of automation has not returned to its former levels. In fact, we see the development of tools like generative AI tools like ChatGPT. The pace of technological adaptation has only further accelerated. Technology continues to advance every day, and workers need policy support to manage this transition successfully. So, with these issues at mind, at UCLA LPPI, we wanted to better understand the California Latinos who worked in jobs at high risk of automation. We wanted to understand their characteristics and their socioeconomic background so policy interventions could be tailored to support them in this time of change. To analyze the Latino workers who are at risk of automation, we used an established academic study that looks at each job's likelihood of being automated. Based on this study, we identified 20 jobs that are highly likely to be automated and employ the most people in California. So as you can see from this table on the right, which shows the 5 largest high automation risk occupations, this includes occupations like drivers, cashiers, retail salespeople, personal aides, and laborers in warehouses. But it's important to note that these are not the only jobs that are susceptible to automation. Now, before I continue, I just wanted to be specific about how we define automation at LPPI. By automation, we mean more run-of-the-mill technological change where machines are used to perform repetitive tasks. For example, Citlali mentioned earlier self-checkout machines in grocery stores. In that instance, cashiers' jobs change from checking out customers directly and helping them to pay to instead now supporting customers with troubleshooting machines. For our purposes here today, we don't focus on generative AI, and that includes tools like ChatGPT, because the research so far shows it's more likely to impact white-collar workers who tend to be white or Asian. With this data on high-risk occupations, we provide a profile of Latino workers whose jobs are changing due to automation and their specific workforce needs as the economy becomes increasingly digitalized. So first, looking at California workers, we see that Latinos are overrepresented in high automation risk jobs. Out of the 4.5 million workers who are in high automation risk jobs, 2.3 million, or over half, are Latino, compared to just 38% of all employed California Latinos. In fact, looking at the chart on this page, we see that Latinos, the dark blue bar on the far left, are the only racial and ethnic group that is overrepresented in high-risk jobs relative to their share of all state workers. As we can see, automation is a Latino issue. And while Latinos represent over half of high-risk workers at a state level, there are significant differences by region. The map on this slide shows the share of high-risk workers in each region that are Latino. And these regions are grouped according to California Jobs First subregions, which is part of the governor's economic plan, the state economic plan. And what we see is that high automation risk workers in the central San Joaquin Valley, in Kern County, and the Inland Empire are particularly likely to be Latino. Close to 2/3 of workers in all 3 of those regions who are in high automation risk jobs are Latino. Importantly, 2 of these 3 regions have large agricultural industries and employ a large number of agricultural workers, and that's an occupation that has a notably high automation risk score. And then, somewhat similarly, the Inland Empire has a large logistics industry that employs many warehouse laborers, another large occupation with a high risk score. For us, these findings highlight the importance of targeted regional investments to support communities and industries where automation is having an outsized impact. Now, when we look at high automation risk workers by age, we see that there are actually substantial differences between Latino workers in high-risk occupations and the overall Latino population in California. This chart breaks down Latino workers by age group, with younger workers at the bottom of the pyramid, and the darker blue color represents Latinos who are in high-risk occupations, while the lighter blue color on the right represents all employed Latinos in California. We find that Latino workers in high-risk jobs are younger, and over a fifth are between the ages of 16 and 24. This is 6 percentage points higher than for all employed Latinos in California. In contrast, employed Latinos overall are more likely to be between the ages of 35 to 64. The relative youth of workers in high-risk occupations signals opportunities to invest in high school and college-age youth and upskill future California workers for decades to come. Given that these young workers will be in California's labor force for the next 40 years, investing in their education today will reap dividends for the future. Now I'll hand the presentation over to my colleague G, who will share the rest of our findings.
Thank you, Misael. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We now know that Latinos are at the front line of an increasingly automated economy. The question remains, are Latino workers well positioned to leverage the transition, or do they risk being displaced? We can't answer these questions without taking stock of where Latino workers are right now. In this report, we profile Latino workers in high-risk jobs in California, breaking down the worker population by gender and examining their socioeconomic characteristics, including income and poverty. We're highlighting a few key findings in today's presentation. So first, we looked at English educational attainment, that we find that California Latino workers in high automation risk jobs are more likely to lack a high school diploma or equivalency than their non-Latino counterparts. This is true for both men and women. 44% of Latino men in high-risk jobs do not complete high school, a higher rate than for all employed Latino men and non-Latinos in occupations exposed to automation. This indicates a strong need to continue investing in education, in particular for Latino men. Next slide, please. We then look at English proficiency, that we find that California Latino workers in high-risk jobs have high rates of limited English proficiency. It's defined as individuals who self-report as speaking English less than very well. Close to half of Latino men working in high automation risk jobs were LEP, the highest rate among Latino and non-Latino groups. Latina women with high automation risk jobs have lower rates of LEP than Latino men, albeit the rate is still much higher than the level of non-Latino workers. Their low levels of English proficiency are a barrier to retraining, as current upskilling programs are poorly designed for workers who don't already have a strong written English skills. Public programs supporting English learning do not feature digital learning components or have a well-established connections to local business talent needs. Next slide, please. And then California Latino workers are also more likely to be non-citizens than workers overall, especially Latino men. We find that 38% of Latino men in high-risk occupations were non-citizens, compared to 30% of all employed Latino men. This figure includes undocumented workers. Roughly 24% of Latinas in high-risk occupations were non-citizens. Generally speaking, only lawful permanent residents, refugees, and asylees are eligible for federally funded workforce development training. The high non-citizen and undocumented shares among Latino workers indicate the precarious condition that many Latino workers may find themselves in during workforce transitions. The Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act is closed off to workers without work authorization. Employers, in contrast, tend to prioritize their private upskilling investment in white-collar and bachelor degree level workers, leaving few upskilling opportunities for non-citizen Latino workers without a college education. Next slide, please. So finally, the California Latino workers in high-risk jobs are also unplugged at home. We find that 1 out of 5 Latino workers live in homes without high-speed internet, also called broadband internet, that includes cable, fiber optics, and DSL service. Workers without reliable internet may be unable to access online training, search and apply for jobs, or work remotely. Similarly, 1 out of 5 Latino workers do not have a computer at home. Individuals who don't have a computer at home tend to have fragmented digital skills and face substantial barriers to vocational and educational opportunities. As a result, over half of Latino workers have little to no digital skills, compared to almost a third of the total US workers. Even young Latino workers, many may have no issue making TikTok videos and posting on social media, don't really know how to use Microsoft Office to edit resumes and apply for jobs online. Next slide, please. So what does this mean for policymakers and practitioners? We believe much of the potential mass job loss can be mitigated by smart public investment in workers. The earlier we invest, the more effective we'll be. I'm walking through a few very high-level ideas, and we have more detailed recommendations in the report. First is to increase equity-focused investment in workforce development programs that are tailored to workers at high risk of automation. Policymakers should consider providing targeted programs and support for workers at different stages of the lifespan. And our report illustrated that different populations have unique needs that current programs are not sufficient to address. Second is to leveraging the 70 million digital equity block grant to address the digital divide. And then it's important that that includes technology access, hardware, but also includes skill training. Third, workers should have a say in when and how AI and automation technology is developed and implemented. We need strong policies to guard real worker rights and more effective labor organizing on the ground. And finally, is to provide robust and timely safety nets for impacted workers by reforming unemployment insurance. Addressing these challenges now is not only an issue of economic justice, but a vital step toward building a resilient and inclusive future workforce. Thank you for joining us today. I look forward to the panel discussion.
Thank you, Gia and Ms. Hale. Now, before we begin our panel discussion, I just want to remind folks to use the Q&A function if you have a question, and we'll try to get to all of them during this hour. We have our first question, and this one is for Amanda. Amanda, given your experience in workforce development, what digital skills are the most essential for workers trying to stay competitive in this digital economy? With increased use of automation and AI, how can we ensure that Latino workers can close the digital skill gap?
Thank you for that question, and thank you to G and Misael and the team for that terrific report. The first and most important skill to be aware of is digital resilience. And digital resilience isn't about memorizing one particular kind of software. Oh, I'm an expert in Microsoft Excel, or oh, I know how to use a particular type of robotics. It's knowing how to behave when you're presented with a novel piece of technology. And one of the most powerful things we can do to support Latino workers is to help them build from the skills they have to the skills they need. And that means recognizing the ingenuity and the creativity that people already have. The second most important skill is to learn things in a real life context. So it's not super helpful to just park people in a Microsoft Office class if what they're actually doing is working in textile manufacturing and they need to be familiar with robotics process automation, right? We want people to be learning skills in the context of the real world industry or occupation that they'll be using those skills. And the last piece is something G mentioned that I want to emphasize, which is when workers have a voice in how new technology gets adopted, it's good for workers and it's good for businesses. So there's research from Stefano Scarpetta at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, that shows that productivity gains are higher when workers are engaged in discussing how new technology tools are going to be used at their workplace. I'm going to say that a second time, right? If your company buys a piece of new technology, the productivity gains you see for workers are going to be higher if you sit down with workers and talk with them about how is this technology going to be used? How can we make it the most useful given our organization and our workplace, right? It's simple, but it's not easy. So those are the three keys I would point to: digital resilience, learning in a real world context, and making sure that workers are at the table as part of the conversation about how new technologies are being adapted.
Thank you so much for that answer, Amanda. Anthony, I'm going to go to you next. How are you thinking about outreach to Latino students who may not see themselves in tech or emerging industries?
Thank you for that question, and I'll echo my colleague Amanda in thanking everybody for allowing us the opportunity to come and speak in front of your group, and the work that you're doing. Right, it's very admirable. Taking a look at what it is, I'm going to take a little bit of a step back and look at it from a personal perspective, right? Before I get into the response of how we're doing the outreach, but I want to give you a little bit of context of who I am, right? As a Latino male, as an individual that grew up in Kern County, that was very, as you identified, as one of those potential impacted areas. I looked at it as understanding what my community does, what my community means to me, and how I could be an asset within that community, and understanding what that workforce looks like. I need to be able to make sure that I had a job, right? So what did that look like for me to get into that workforce on a personal level? So I took it that as a personal thing of, what do I need to do as an individual, right, to be able to ensure that I had an opportunity? So didn't know what that looked like. I joined the military. I traveled across the world. I did a lot of stuff. But the job that I did, I consciously chose something that I knew when I got out of the service, that I would be able to have a place of employment within my hometown, my community itself. But that really laid the foundation for me to understand the potential and the capability of what automation could be, what it could look like, right? When you start talking about field instrumentation, calibration, the mechanical aptitude, the electrical aptitude, some knowledge that you're going to be able to possess as you go. But then at the same time, I was always willing and open to learn more, right? To do more, to be in the know of how we're going to be able to do this. So I'm going to go back and say, from an outreach perspective, right? We at the California Community Colleges, we've got a plan. We've got that Vision 2030 roadmap that really lays out the goals of how we're going to have a positive impact of changing the system and bettering it for all of our students, right? And giving them the opportunity within their local community colleges. So we've got 116 throughout the state of California that have focused on the applied sciences. They have a hands-on practical program that gives our students an opportunity to get that learning experience, the knowledge, the skills, like Amanda had addressed earlier, to be able to be successful when they apply them into the workforce. Not to be intimidated by what those skills mean, not to be, that they're bigger than the picture of ourselves. To the point that was alluded to earlier, we need to be able to make sure that the automation is still having the human presence, right? So when you start talking about that digital kiosk, when you go to McDonald's, you have to order at the kiosk. That's automation, but there's got to be somebody that works on that kiosk when that mechanical or that electrical device fails, right? So we just need to look at how those jobs have shifted and how our roles as individuals are going to shift with them. So the outreach component of it, again, circling back, I'm going to go on for a little bit, but circling back to the outreach aspect of it is, we're really elevating the visibility of the opportunities throughout the state of California within our community college system. At the same time, elevating it from, here are jobs, here's our apprenticeship programs, here's support, wraparound services that allows all of our students to be able to be successful, whichever journey that they choose to go down.
Thank you so much for that, Anthony. Kimberly, I'm going to go to you next. What does a proactive labor strategy look like when it comes to automation, not just defending jobs, but shaping the future of workers?
Thanks. Well, it's been said a few times, but I'm going to really hammer it home is that workers having a say in how and what automation looks like. And the best way to do that is with representation. It's by being organized and having the safety in numbers. SEIU in particular, we represent service workers, both in the public and private sector. And the biggest fight we have is making sure that workers are in early in the conversation. And I think Amanda highlighted it earlier. We have seen so much better investments, both in public and private, when workers can explain what their needs are, so the technology reflects what they're doing. A lot of times there's a disconnect between the top down, and they'll get this technology and they're supposed to implement it, and it's a delay. So when we shape what technology looks like and it's meant to benefit the workers to help them get better interactions with the consumers, the result is good for everybody, but that often doesn't happen because workers don't have a seat at the table. So for us, organizing is the biggest way to do that, but that's a hurdle in itself. For fast food, we had to pass legislation to raise wages and create a council, which has fast food workers at a council with other franchisees and owners. And they're raising issues that many of the corporate side, of the employer side, had never even heard of. And there are things that they would want to address because it improves the experience for all. Since passing our legislation, we've seen a 5% growth, despite them saying, well, with these wages increased to $20 an hour, we're going to be replaced entirely with automation. And I think the proactive labor strategy we have is we continue to organize in fields where they're saying they're going to be displaced by automation, in large part because that specter is nothing more than a ghost. The reality of automation entirely replacing workers is something that's been said for years. Currently, we're trying to organize rideshare drivers, and we see Waymo in the streets. We hear about robo taxis, but the reality behind that is it requires a lot of investments and a lot of money. The labor need is always going to be there, but when there's that fear of automation, people start getting a little nervous and they take lower wages, they take more hours when really what they need to do is band together. And so that's one of our biggest campaigns right now. There's 600,000 drivers in California, and corporations don't want that. They tried to pass in Prop 22 a 7/8 requirement just to get the right to bargain. That was struck down in courts. So we're moving forward, but they made them independent contractors. That means they're not covered by the NLRA. So we're passing legislation currently, AB 1340, if anybody feels like being an activist, but that allows a pathway for them to represent themselves. And that's important because then they get a seat at the table. Then they get a voice in how the expansion of automation looks like. And we believe that it's worthwhile to invest in these workers to organize because they will then be able to help move the economy forward in a way that benefits everybody. And just to circle back to one thing on fast food, with that automation concern, that consumer experience, we're seeing fast food entities move away from self-checkout, move out from the kiosk because they were seeing a decline in people don't want to go in to get a quick meal and have to work. They don't like dealing with technology frustrations. And so we're seeing a shift back to workers despite an increase in wages. And that's because the benefit for both the employer and the worker is there to have a happy employee that's using technology to expedite things but not be displaced.
Thank you for that, Kimberly. I'm gonna circle back to the research team. Citlali, your research shows that 52% of California's high-risk automation jobs are held by Latino workers. What specific occupations are driving this number, and why are Latino workers overrepresented here?
Thank you for the question. So yeah, Latino workers are overrepresented in certain occupations. So for example, Latino workers are represented 93% of California's other agricultural workers. They also represented 82% of landscaping and groundskeeping workers, 76% of construction workers, and more than 2/3 of cooks. So the overrepresentation of Latinos in these roles reflects structural barriers such as limited access to education and training, language barriers, and restrictions related to work authorization status. Many Latino workers are challenged into these sectors with fewer advancements opportunities, which increases their exposure to automation risks and economic instability. So a lot of our policy recommendations look into how we can reskill these workers through workforce development programs and ensure that they have a smooth transition to these new jobs.
Thank you so much. G, I'm going to go to you next. Your report calls for greater equity in workforce development investments. Based on the data, what are the most urgent gaps that need to be addressed to improve these programs for Latino workers?
Thank you for this question. In my opinion, there are two key challenges. First, workforce training programs are usually so oversubscribed, and the funding level, especially at California state level, tend to fluctuate depending on the state budget. Second, partially due to the limitation in terms of resources, the most vulnerable workers are not served. We know that from the state evaluation using Workforce Development Agency data that Latino program participation closely tracked Latinos' share of the state's workforce, which is around 38%, give or take. However, we know Latino workers represented 56% of all low-wage workers in the state. That there are and they account for 52% of the high automation risk workers. Ensuring equitable program access, especially for those who has the most urgent needs, is critical. I'll give you a couple examples. For example, the state can reduce barriers for non-citizens to receive workforce development training by clearly designating more general funds with no immigration eligibility requirements. California's employment training panel has a great seed program, which is to train immigrant workers to be entrepreneurs with wraparound service. They were able to do this with general funds, so there's no immigration eligibility check. I invite state practitioners to be more creative in a way that they can address these needs. And also, past experience also shows that there's a lot of gap in terms of training among program officers who are enrolling workers. A lot of times, even when they were not giving, they would assume that you have to be a citizen or you have to be an LPR to access service, even though that's not required. So that unless workforce providers are given clear eligibility guidance, they will default to excluding workers that they think are not eligible. From the presentation, we also know that Latino men face a lot of barriers in terms of human capital, but most workforce training program enrollees are currently women. It's important to increase outreach to recruit non-traditional students, especially Latino men workers, student like parent workers, people who have a very busy schedule. And there's a lot of needs in terms of building up general literacy, competency on top of digital skills to provide the kind of wraparound service that can eventually promote upward career mobility. Thank you.
Thank you, G. The next question is from our audience, Amanda and Anthony. I'll let you guys take a stab at the next one. As automation reshapes industries where Latino workers are overrepresented, how can education and workforce development systems support a transition that affirms their existing labor skills while also fostering college-going identity, not solely through CTE, but through broader academic and leadership opportunities?
I love this question because there are Californians who are really national leaders on this issue. One of them in particular is Dr. Crystal Rawls at Cal State Dominguez Hills and the program she runs there called the Workforce Integration Network. So we know what helps people build from where they are to where they need to be. And none of it is a mystery. They need supportive services like childcare and transportation that enable them to continue upskilling or reskilling and complete additional credentials. They need those credentials to be ones that employers care about. So they need to be industry recognized or validated credentials. And those credentials should be stackable. These are things that the Chancellor's Office has fostered through a number of initiatives, which I know Tony will talk about. But there are also things that nonprofit community-based organizations that are on the ground can be crucial in connecting people to. Nonprofit organizations have already spent years earning the trust of community members. That trust is hard to build and quick to evaporate if people feel like they were misled or don't have accurate information. And so those nonprofit community organizations can be absolutely critical on-ramps into community college or other workforce training programs. But in order for that to be the case, they themselves have to trust that they're steering people right, that it's not going to be a program that somebody pours their time and energy into and doesn't result in the outcomes they're looking for. So data is valuable in terms of being able to show this is the percentage of folks who've graduated from our program. These are the kinds of jobs they tend to get. And that also has to be disaggregated data. If your program is working well for students generally, but it's not working well for Latino students, then guess what? Your program isn't working well for students generally, right? If your program is working well for native English speakers, but it's not working well for people who are multilingual, your program is actually not working well, right? So being intentional about using best practices in education and workforce development to design programs that are asset-based, that start from a human-centered design approach to say, what are the skills someone is bringing and how do we help them build on those skills to get to the next step that they want to get to in their career pathway is really important. I want to call out one more California state agency that's important in this process, and that's the Employment Training Panel. It's an incumbent worker training program, right? So it is money to train people who already have jobs, but whose employers want to be able to help them upskill. An example from Massachusetts is a manufacturing company that wanted to train its workers in lean manufacturing and then realized that a lot of their workers were English language learners. And so they did a combined class in English language for lean manufacturing training, right? If you think about specialized vocabulary like Six Sigma, that's not something that rolls right off your tongue when you're learning a second language, right? I'm going to stop now because I know Anthony has a lot to add about what the Chancellor's Office is working on this front, but those are a few things that I would highlight.
I appreciate that, Amanda, and I could just sit here and let you go because you're taking the words right out of my mouth and putting them into the context of everything. So, but no, I appreciate the softball that you gave me as well. As Amanda mentioned, there's a lot of stuff that we're doing in the California community college systems, and Kimberly mentioned it earlier, the SEIU, right? We've been developing partnerships with different organizations. Amanda talked about the community-based organizations. For example, there's the MAOF, right? So the Mexican American Opportunities Foundation that is providing opportunities for their clients, their students to get into like bookkeeping, into opportunities of employment. Well, I partnered with them to be able to provide an opportunity for them to continue their career in office skills, office administration positions, office management opportunities, right? As they start to go into the progression of what Amanda is talking about, that stackable credential, at the same time, recognizing the skills that they have and then articulating that to applicable units towards a degree. And that's what we're calling the credit for prior learning model, right? So the CPL aspect of it is really recognizing the skills that have been possessed through your journey, your work experience, all of the technical training, all of the higher education training, and really putting them into a portfolio. So that's 3 different portfolios. You got your education portfolio, you've got your industry recognized credential skills training, et cetera, that can be assessed. And then you've got your work experience and being able to articulate that over that to a degree pathway. The other component of it is focusing on the adult learners, because we know a lot of our adult learners are specifically of Latino descent. So being able to provide an opportunity for the students but we have to recognize Why are they adult learners? We have to have an understanding what put them in a position where they had to go back to the work, where they had to go right into the workforce, and they wasn't given an opportunity to get into education. Maybe they didn't like school, right? In high school, I know a lot of people. Heck, I was one. I didn't like high school. I was not enjoying what I was doing. I enjoyed the hands-on component of it, right? I knew I had to finish, but it's being able, as Amanda was saying, is identifying where those students are and then adjusting our programs to meet the students where they're at and really getting that component of it. A lot of that also goes back to the state system of what we're doing right now, and you'll see it in the current budget. There's a tool that has been really highlighted, and that's that career passport. So the career passport is really the platform that's going to provide that resume that has captured the student's journey to be able to provide a tool for the employer to recognize the skills that they possess and how they equate to the workforce that they're going into. And that's going to be on this resume component of it. And that's, big stuff that's happening throughout the state. I'll stop with that because, again, I could be here forever talking about all the different avenues and activities that we're doing to help support the development of opportunities.
Thank you both, Amanda and Anthony. Michelle, I'm going to go to you next. You recommend leveraging tools like the Digital Equity Act and the Affordable Connectivity Program. How could these policies be implemented in a way that directly benefits the communities in your study?
Thank you. That's a great question, Alberto. So through the Digital Equity Act, California was awarded a $70 million block grant, and that was to support the implementation of its digital equity plan. Now, that plan aims to ensure that all Californians have access to high-speed broadband internet, that they have device access, and also they receive the training and support to be able to use those tools. So with that plan in place and that funding in place, it's important to ensure that block grants fund broadband internet access, digital device access, and digital skills for disconnected workers, and especially is key to monitor the implementation of the plan to ensure the plans and the program is effective in connecting Latinos and other technologically underserved populations to the internet. So having said that, the Digital Equity Act funds have not yet been released, and it's not clear when the funds will be released to state and local governments. And I want to uplift the question in the chat that was answered by my colleague Amanda about an unconfirmed blog post about the pause in the funds. There has been no official confirmation of a pause from the administration. And as my colleague, excuse me, Amanda noted, it's important to note that many of the Digital Equity Act provisions are actually written into statute by Congress, so they can't be changed by any administration. I think what I want to end on is that this is an important moment to collectively advocate for protecting funding for digital connectivity and inclusion and ensure that every American, regardless of what their geography is, where they live, what their background, has access to the internet and the digital tools they need to participate in our increasingly digitalized society. Digital access, digital skills, internet connectivity, they're essential infrastructure. You can't work without them, in the 21st century economy. And they're needed not only for individuals, but for a vibrant and dynamic 21st century economy. So Amanda, as Amanda mentioned, any advocates who want to make sure California or their own state can hit the ground running with NTIA grants can reach out to their congresspeople and to ask the NTIA nominee about timely implementation of the funding.
Thank you, Misael. Kimberly, I'm going to go to you next. Can you tell us if there are any campaigns or wins that you can point to that have helped Latino workers navigate automation or protect their economic security?
Yeah, absolutely. I touched on it a little bit earlier, but we did 2 years ago pass legislation that gave workers not only an increase in wages up to $20 an hour, but also gave them the Fast Food Council, which is a seat at the table. What's so important about that is we can work to pass laws, wage theft, workplace violence, all of these different protections in place for the workers. But if there is a chilling effect where workers feel like if they speak out, they will be penalized, if they push back on any kind of decisions, they will be let go, and losing their job could be 1 week, 2 weeks of no pay may make the decision between them losing their apartment, being able to feed their family. They're rarely going to push back unless they have that security in numbers. And so that was what was so important for us, because when we started organizing these fast food workers, we kept hearing about all these violations, but many of them were afraid to speak out until they had kind of the protection of power in numbers. And so the council's given that, where we are now having a conversation at the state level about how to improve different forms of workplace violence, and that includes one of the things that people mention is the automated fryers. The automated fryers are often made without the worker in mind. And so we've had a lot of workers get injured because actually most of our fast food workers are middle-aged Latino women. So there's a height differential that's not taken into consideration. People think these are like teens working. And the statistics show it's not. It is mostly Latinos. It's a large population of women, and they're mostly middle-aged. They don't just work there for the summer, they work there for years. And so when you don't take into consideration the real workers are doing that, you're going to see an increase of injuries. And so that's been one of the things that we've been able to lift up their voices, have them give feedback on the automation, because we're Luddites only to the extent that we think that workers not having a voice and being oppressed by technology is problematic, but not in the sense that we're anti-technology. So if there's a way for technology and automation to help workers, not have arthritis from constantly working the fryer, but be able to expedite things, we're supportive of that, but they need to be involved early in the conversation. And that Fast Food Council has really given our workers an opportunity to lift up issues that weren't even in the thought of people creating the technology and deploying the technology. So that was a major victory for us, and one that we're continuing to build on. We still need to organize these workers. We need a right to a union. But the more we have that groundswell, and the more people feel comfortable saying, like, I do want representation, I do have a way to raise my voice, the more likely we are able to get that ability to organize.
Thank you so much for that answer, Kimberly. Anthony, I'm going to go to you next. What kind of partnerships with industry are proving most effective in helping students make the leap from training to a good job?
Thank you for that question, and it's a good one. I'm going to go off script a little bit in regards to the automation and just give you a little bit of a brief example of some of those partnerships, and then I'll bring it back to the automation component of it and the technology. But one of the things that we've really been focusing on is those partnerships. We know we cannot do this by ourselves. We need to have a strong collaboration and partnership and moving the work. One of those examples is UDW. So, we talked about the SEIU. They have a strong emphasis of everything. UDW is United Domestic Workers that really focus within the home healthcare aides, but 78% of them are women and 42% of them are Latina women, right? So when you start talking about that partnership, is being able to partner with your unions, your membership organizations, right? And allowing, the thing that UDW is doing is providing wraparound services to support the student through their journey, but then not only for the student, but the family members as well. So when you bring the family members into the workforce or bring them into that support mechanism, then you bring the entire group together and they're all doing it together to advance in their journey in that career. So that's just an example, not in automation, but it's something to think about, as Kimberly was mentioning. There are unions, there are organizations out there that have the desire to help support that. There are an apprenticeship program, right? We start developing an apprenticeship pathway because those are the greatest places to start your real world work experience while the students are completing their higher education attainment component of it, right? So by partnering with an organization, now there's other ones that are non-union as well. So I believe Amazon would be another prime example of us being able to partner with Amazon at one of our local community colleges to develop an apprenticeship pathway for the maintenance technician individual that'll work on the automated lines that they have in their distribution centers itself, because you still have some form of the mechanical and electrical aptitudes that individuals have. So there's some of the partnerships when you start talking about it. There's additional avenues, right? That can, what we call the mentorship and network initiatives. Automation companies and trade organizations, they create these mentorship programs where Latino students will be prepared with the experienced professional who can guide them through their career, through their learnings, advice here, and then also navigate some of the challenges with what the workforce entails. But lastly, I mentioned this earlier about the MAOF. I really want us to be able to keep a mindful attention to those nonprofits, as Amanda mentioned earlier. There's nonprofits that are promoting Latino advancements in the tech field itself. Nonprofit organizations like Latinos in Tech and Hispanic Heritage Foundations. You connect with these different industry foundational groups. They are doing the work. And then as the community colleges, we want to do the work in the partnership with them to be able to provide that accredited credential institution awards. And when you start awarding them on these, as Amanda mentioned earlier about the stackable, those are milestones that build agency for our students, get them invested into their professional development. So
Thank you, Anthony.
appreciate that. Thank you.
And I just wanted to jump in on that because it is something, I know we're talking about certain service industries, but there's also the hidden work that is a full career. And so SEIU and UDW have a partnership both on in-home health service aides as well as family, friend, and neighbor, which is childcare providers, both licensed and unlicensed. And there's a whole career there, but a lot of them require additional credentials. So these people often are working full time, then they come home and they're caring for their family with needs, or they're caring for their neighbor's children, and that feels insurmountable. So representing these workers and getting them not only paid for the work they're doing in the home, because that is labor, even if it's hidden labor, is really important to allowing them then to have the freedom to pursue additional education. And one of the things we found in how do we get them additional credit so that they can, go from being a family, friend, and neighbor to a licensed family child care provider who receives more funding, or from being a in-home supportive service to a certified nursing aide to into the healthcare industry, is that meeting them where they're at. So it's education that is not on a strict semester timeline. It's education that's in off hours, that's in alternative languages. And that's something that we've really partnered with community colleges in particular, because we've seen when people go through our California community colleges, our California public universities, they net higher paying jobs with less debt. But getting those programs up online is very difficult. So we've been investing in our public infrastructure that way, so that they're not only seeking out private universities that have a little bit more flexibility. And that has made all the difference in a pathway for our workers doing this hidden labor to becoming professionals.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kimberly. Amanda, I'm going to go to you next. In your experience, how can employers and training institutions work together to ensure that these programs are truly inclusive, not just in name, but in practice?
It starts from the very beginning. And that means really questioning, why do we have our recruitment and enrollment set up the way we do? There's a program in Chicago that did a really interesting 2-generation enrollment model, inviting DACA or Dreamer youth to bring their parents with them to the job training enrollment session. That's not customary in workforce development, but it was appropriate in that case for that audience. Other workforce programs will let people bring their kids to enrollment, right? If you can't find immediate child care because you're not working and you can't afford it, and you want to sign up for this training program, can we make it possible for you to bring your kids for the orientation evening or the sign up period, right? So it starts from the beginning. It starts with intentionality, thinking through, what does it mean for this to be inclusive? Is it about language? Is it about technology? If you're doing everything on a smartphone and you don't have a laptop or a desktop computer, can I connect you with a nonprofit organization that does device distribution so that you can get that laptop, so that you can be with your fellow classmates on equal footing, right? It doesn't mean that I, as the training provider, have to be an expert in everything. I don't have to be the device distributor myself, but I need to have those robust referral relationships. It starts with being intentional about which employers you're partnering with, right? I mentioned earlier about the employment training panel. workforce training programs can and should be selective in which employers they're going to choose to partner with. Are they going to partner with employers who are high road employers? California has a high road training partnership program that specifically selects for those, but in terms of the wages they pay or the flexibility they offer in hours or the fact that workers have a voice at the table in working conditions, whatever parameters you want to set for what's a desirable employer, you don't have to say yes to every employer who comes across your radar screen. And in fact, you probably shouldn't say yes. Because you should be thoughtful about, as a training program or an educational institution, what is a meaningful connection? And then the last thing, and this is by far the most important, don't underestimate people. People bring ingenuity and creativity to the table in spades, but they're often not asked for it. They're asked, with this assumption of, hey, you're coming to me for help and I'm going to help you. Well, that may be the case, right? I may be walking in your door because I want to get a job or a better job, and I'm looking for you to help me do that. But I also need you to recognize that I'm walking in the door with a wealth of life experiences, workplace experiences, interpersonal intelligence, informal learning that can and should be recognized as part of this broader program. So a classroom program or a training program that doesn't recognize that I'm a 360-degree human being, that I'm a well-rounded person, and just looks at me as a placement statistic isn't going to serve me well and isn't going to result in the best outcomes possible. So those are really the key components. And I know we're getting close on time here, so I'll stop with that piece.
Thank you so much, Amanda. We have time for one last question, and this is about the digital gap that a lot of these folks have. Misael, you found that nearly 1 in 5 Latino workers in high-risk jobs lack reliable internet at home. How does the digital gap share their ability to retrain, access benefits, or pivot to a more secure employment?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And we've kind of pointed at it a little bit before, but a lot of these problems overlap. And so that also means that there's a lot of smaller ways that we can start to make an impact on how automation is reshaping work for Latinos and their ability to retrain. So more directly, your question, we've mentioned that our economy and society are becoming more digital. And so workers who don't have internet access will also become more economically disconnected. Workers without internet access might be unable to access online job applications, training and education, access remote work. So thinking about the pandemic most recently, for example, many people who primarily worked in offices temporarily switched to fully online remote work from their homes. That requires a stable internet connection. And without one, workers aren't able to perform their job remotely and transition in those kinds of times. And so, that also offers you some flexibility if you're an office worker in a time, say, when you need that. So more directly connected to automation, many free skill building and education programs are primarily online and require internet connection to access. So without reliable internet, Latino workers might not be able to access these free programs and build the skills they need for the jobs of the 21st century.
Thank you so much, Misael. And that concludes our program for today. On behalf of LPPI, I want to thank Amanda, Anthony, and Kimberly, and you guys for joining us. The QR code on the screen will take you to the automation report. Please, we ask you to share with your networks. If you're a member of the press or would like to contact our panelists and researchers, please email us at lppipress@latino.ucla.edu. Thank you.